Aiden, Finn, and Ava had made it out of the forest, but the mystery was only beginning. Ava was still too terrified to tell the truth. Finn seemed to sense something that no human could. And the mysterious figures in the woods, had they really disappeared? Who helped Ava escape? Why did Finn seem uneasy even after leaving the forest? And what secrets awaited them at the police station? Join us as we uncover the shocking truth in Part 2. Aiden drove straight to the police station, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Ava sat in the back, clutching Finn tightly, her face pale with tension. Even after leaving the forest, she hadn't stopped shaking. Her fear hadn't faded at all. Beside her, Finn sat completely still, his ears perked, his eyes locked on the window, as if he was still watching something behind them. Aiden couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine. Was someone following them? Even now, as they pulled up to the station, Aiden quickly stepped out, opening the door for Ava. "Come on, Ava. You're safe here." She hesitated. Her small hands gripped Finn's fur even tighter before slowly stepping out. She didn't say a word. Her eyes kept darting around as if she expected someone to be waiting for her outside. Interrogating Ava, the first in the interrogation room, Ava sat silently on the chair across from Aiden. Her head was bowed, her small hands gripping tightly onto the fabric of her shirt, her body still trembling slightly. Finn sat at her feet, refusing to leave her side. He didn't whimper, he didn't growl, but his eyes, they were more alert than usual. Aiden lowered his voice, keeping it gentle, trying to make Ava feel safe. "Ava, I know you were really scared, but you're safe now, I promise." Ava bit her lip, hesitating, then whispered, "I don't know if they're coming." Aiden leaned in slightly, keeping his tone calm and steady. "Who are they, Ava? Can you tell me?" She pressed her lips together tightly, clearly struggling with whether or not to speak. I don't know who they are, but they're not like normal people. They're always there. They're always watching." Aiden felt a cold chill creep up his spine. "Have you seen them before?" Ava was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "I never saw their faces, but I heard them. They whisper at night. I think they were looking for me, but he told me to run." Aiden leaned in slightly. "He? Who are you talking about, Ava?" Ava lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with worry. "He found me. He told me to run. Told me not to look back, but I don't know who he is." Aiden felt it deep in his gut. This man was the key. But if Ava didn't know his identity, how could they track him down? Finn's strange reaction. Something is wrong. As Aiden stepped out of the interrogation room, he noticed something. Finn was restless. The pup paced back and forth, his eyes constantly darting toward the hallway leading to the front entrance. He sensed something. Aiden knelt beside him, gently running a hand over his back. "What is it, buddy? Something wrong?" Finn looked up at Aiden, his eyes carrying a silent warning. Aiden stood up, scanning the area carefully. The police station was supposed to be safe, but why was Finn reacting like this? Was someone nearby? Just then, a fellow officer walked past, giving Aiden a light pat on the shoulder. "You did good? We'll keep the kid safe." Did she say anything? Aiden wasn't ready to share too much yet, not until he had checked everything himself. He simply nodded and replied, "The girl mentioned a man who helped her escape, but we don't know who he is yet." The officer nodded, about to step away. When Finn let out a low, quiet growl, Aiden immediately turned back. But Finn wasn't looking at the officer. He was staring at the wall behind him. Turning point, a suspicious photograph. Aiden followed Finn's gaze, and his eyes landed on an old photograph hanging on the wall. It was a group photo of police officers from years ago, taken during a training exercise. Suddenly, Ava's small hands clenched tightly onto her shirt, her voice trembling. "Him? He's there." Aiden's body went rigid. "What did you just say?" Ava slowly lifted her hand, pointing to one man in the picture. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his face stern, unreadable. Aiden stared at the man's face, a deep unease settling in his chest. Beside him, the officer frowned, his expression shifting. "Wait. That guy, he went missing over 10 years ago." Aiden felt a jolt of electricity shoot down his spine. A man who disappeared a decade ago was the same person who helped Ava escape? Finn whimpered softly, his eyes still locked onto the photograph. Aiden took a deep breath, knowing one thing for certain: another mystery had just unraveled. And this story was far from over. Aiden stood frozen in front of the photograph, his eyes locked on the man Ava had just pointed to. A police officer who had been missing for 10 years was the same man who had helped Ava escape. The question swirled in Aiden's mind, refusing to make sense. Beside him, the other officer frowned, his gaze sweeping over the old photo. That's Lieutenant Richard Hayes. He disappeared mysteriously 10 years ago during an investigation in Blackwood Forest. Aiden snapped his head toward him. What did you just say? Investigating what? The officer shook his head, his expression filled with uncertainty. No one knows. One night, he went into the forest with his team and never came back. The entire team? No. 2 others survived, but they both resigned immediately afterward. Neither of them ever spoke about what they saw. Aiden felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. What had Richard Hayes discovered in Blackwood Forest? And whatever it was it terrifying enough to make 2 officers walk away from their careers forever? He turned back to Ava. She was clutching Finn tightly, her small hands gripping his fur, her wide eyes filled with confusion. Ava, are you sure? You really saw this man? Ava nodded without hesitation. I remember his face, but he looked terrified, like he knew something awful. Aiden's stomach twisted. If Richard Hayes was still alive, then where had he been for the past 10 years? Old case files, the mystery of Richard Hayes. Aiden didn't wait. He rushed straight into the cold case archive. Finn followed closely behind, his steps cautious, as if he could sense something wasn't right. Everything about Richard Hayes' disappearance had to be in here. Aiden sifted through dozens of case files, his eyes scanning the names until Richard Hayes, missing since 10/12, lead investigator on the Blackwood case. Aiden yanked the file from the cabinet, flipping quickly through the documents inside. Case details. Richard Hayes, police lieutenant, disappeared while investigating an unknown case in Blackwood Forest. 2 other officers survived, but resigned immediately after. Hayes' final report mentioned a mysterious group operating near the forest, but no evidence was ever found. A mysterious group? Were they the same people watching them in the forest? Aiden read further. There was a section in Hayes' report, vague, almost deliberately unclear, as if Hayes didn't want to put into words what he had seen. Notes from Hayes' report. Something isn't right. We followed strange tracks deeper into the forest, but the further we went, the stronger the feeling became. The feeling of being watched. It wasn't just eyes in the dark. It was the whispers. Voices that shouldn't exist. If anyone is reading this report, stop, don't go any further. Aiden felt goosebumps crawl over his skin. Voices? Whispers? Finn let out a low whimper. Then suddenly he growled and backed away, his eyes locked onto another file in the drawer. Aiden frowned, slowly reaching out to pick up the folder Finn had reacted to. Finn senses something. Aiden looked down at the file in his hands. Missing persons report, Blackwood Forest connection. A total of 17 people had gone missing in the past 20 years, all near Blackwood Forest. Only 3 bodies had ever been found. Cause of death? Unknown. Most of the missing cases were never officially reported, as if these people had never existed at all. Finn's growl deepened, his eyes sharp with tension. Aiden took a deep breath and turned the page. And then, his blood ran cold. A name on the missing persons list stopped him in his tracks. Richard Hayes, missing for 10 years. No body recovered. If Hayes had vanished, but Ava had seen him alive, where had he been for the past 10 years? Aiden felt a cold grip tightening around his throat. Someone had kept Hayes hidden, or he had been hiding in the shadows himself, waiting for the right moment to resurface. What was lurking in Blackwood Forest? Aiden shut the file, forcing himself to piece everything together. Richard Hayes vanished during an investigation in Blackwood. Ava swore she saw him. Finn reacted strongly to the missing persons file. A secret group had once operated near the forest. Everything, every clue, every unanswered question was leading him back to Blackwood. If Hayes was alive, he was the key to unraveling this mystery. Finn scratched lightly at Aiden's leg, his eyes filled with urgency, as if telling him it was time to act. Aiden's hand instinctively tightened around his holster. It was time to go back to Blackwood Forest, and this time, he wouldn't leave with unanswered questions. Back to Blackwood. This time, they're ready. The dark silhouette of Blackwood Forest loomed before them. The police cruiser rolled to a stop at the forest's entrance. the engine humming softly as Aiden stepped out. But this time, he wasn't going in alone. "We're not making the same mistakes as last time." 3 other officers stood beside the vehicle, each fully armed, flashlights strapped to their reflective vests. Finn wagged his tail lightly, but he wasn't relaxed. He took a sharp inhale, his ears standing high, his body coiled with tension. He could already sense something waiting for them inside. Aiden crouched down, placing a firm hand on Finn's back, his voice low but resolute. "This time, buddy, we're finding the truth." Finn let out a soft bark, then took off toward the forest. The real investigation had begun. Finn leads the way. The overlooked clues. Under the beam of their flashlights, the forest felt darker than ever. The towering trees intertwined overhead, forming a canopy so thick it blocked most of the night sky's light. But Finn moved with certainty. No hesitation, no second-guessing. His nose skimmed the ground, sniffing deeply at times, as if detecting a scent that no human could perceive. Aiden scanned their surroundings, his eyes sharp, making sure not to miss a single detail. Then, Finn suddenly stopped. He scratched at the ground, whimpering slightly, as if he had just found something important. Aiden stepped closer, kneeling beside Finn. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating something they had missed the first time. Footprints. Not fresh, but not too old either. The deep imprints in the damp soil belonged to an adult, the tread marks clear, leading further into the woods. Someone had passed through here, not long before they arrived. Finn lifted his head, his gaze locking onto Aiden, waiting for his decision. Aiden tightened his grip on his holster, his instincts on high alert. "Follow it." Finn gave a slight nod, then pressed forward, leading the way. A terrifying discovery, the abandoned cabin gnawing. They followed the footprints for over a mile before the team suddenly halted. A structure emerged through the dense canopy, a small, old wooden cabin, its walls worn with age but still standing. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Aiden exchanged glances with the officers, then gave a silent nod. "Stay ready. There could be someone inside. Let's check it out." Finn didn't wait. He moved silently, his body low, sniffing the air deeply. He was tracking a scent. Aiden raised his hand, signaling the team to move in with caution. As he pushed the wooden door open, a wave of damp, musty air rushed out. Inside, the place was a mess, but it wasn't untouched. Someone had been here recently. What they found inside: a makeshift bed, the blanket still faintly warm, several empty food cans, proof that someone had been eating here recently, an old flashlight, still working, its battery not yet drained, a map of Blackwood Forest, with one area circled in red ink. Someone had been using this cabin as a hideout. But who were they? And why were they here? Aiden scanned the room, analyzing every small detail, searching for anything that might reveal more clues. Someone was living here. But the real question is, where did they go? Finn senses someone nearby. Finn suddenly stiffened. His ears perked high, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air more intensely. Aiden felt it too. They weren't alone. Suddenly, Finn's ears shot up, his entire body tensing like a coiled spring. He let out a low growl, but it wasn't an aggressive one. It was a warning. Aiden immediately drew his gun, his eyes scanning every inch of the cabin. Finn's onto something. The officers snapped into alert mode, their flashlights sweeping the area, searching for any signs of movement. Finn crept forward, his paws silent against the wooden floor, heading toward a corner of the cabin where a small pile of stacked firewood lay. He sniffed deeply, then suddenly scratched at one of the planks, as if something important was buried beneath it. Aiden crouched down, carefully lifting the wooden plank aside. Underneath the old wood, there was a trapdoor, a hidden entrance leading beneath the cabin. Aiden looked at the officers, his voice low but firm. "Flashlights on. We're opening it." His grip tightened on his gun, his finger resting just above the trigger, his focus locked onto the wooden hatch before him. Finn didn't take his eyes off it, his growl growing stronger, his muscles taut, ready to react to whatever lay beneath. What was down there? Finn's body stiffened further, his ears pricked high, his growling deepening. Aiden exchanged glances with the officers beside him, then gave the signal. "Open it." As the hatch was yanked open, a rush of damp, stale air billowed up from below. Flashlights pierced through the darkness, revealing a rickety wooden staircase leading into a pitch-black underground space. And then, Before anyone could react, a figure lunged out of the darkness. Ambushed! Watch out! Aiden staggered back, his gun snapping up instantly, but the figure moved like a blur, darting past him and bolting straight for the dark forest. Finn, get him! Finn let out a ferocious bark and tore after the fleeing man, his paws kicking up dead leaves as he charged into the night. Aiden didn't hesitate. He launched forward, sprinting into the trees, ignoring the shouts of the officers behind him. Whoever this man was, he didn't want them investigating any further. But why? What was he hiding? Chasing through the darkness. Finn weaved through thick underbrush, the wind slicing past his ears as he locked onto the man's scent. Aiden pushed forward, but the fugitive was fast. Too fast, moving like he knew every hidden trail in these woods. Suddenly, the man cut hard past a massive tree trunk, disappearing from Aiden's view for a split second, and that was all Finn needed. The shepherd leaped, his body twisting mid-air before crashing into the man, sending them both tumbling onto the damp forest floor. A dull thud echoed as the two figures hit the ground. Aiden was there in an instant, stepping forward, gun locked on target. "Don't move," the man panted heavily, his hands shooting up in surrender, his eyes wild with panic under the beam of the flashlight. "I don't want to hurt anyone. Don't shoot, please." Aiden dropped to one knee, grabbing the man's wrist and flipping him over to check for weapons. Someone had been living in these woods, but why had he run? The stranger, more afraid than dangerous. The flashlight beam hit his face. He wasn't large or intimidating. If anything, he looked weak, thin, malnourished. His beard unkempt, his skin pale and hollow, as if he had been hiding away for years. His clothes were torn and filthy, caked in mud, and one of his eyes was bruised, the dark circles beneath them hinting at days without sleep. Aiden locked eyes with him, his voice steady but firm. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The man swallowed hard, his entire body trembling, from cold, from fear, or both. I'm just hiding, that's all. I swear, I don't mean anyone harm." Aiden's stare hardened. Hiding from who? The man's breath hitched, his face tightening in fear. "Them? I can't say. If I do, they'll kill me." Aiden felt his stomach knot. There it was again. Them. He leaned in slightly, keeping his voice calm but unyielding. "Who's after you? We can help you, but you have to tell us what you know." The man shivered, his wide eyes darting to Finn, who stood rigid beside Aiden, letting out a low, steady growl. He wasn't attacking, but he was watching closely, as if he could tell when the man was lying. The man took a deep breath, his lips parting as if he was about to say something. Then he froze, his eyes locked in place, his entire body going rigid. Aiden immediately sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" The man's voice was barely a whisper. "They're still out there." Shocking revelation, Ava recognizes the truth. At that moment, the police team caught up. Ava ran toward Aiden, but the moment her eyes landed on the stranger, they went wide with shock. Finn, sensing the shift, turned his gaze to Ava, waiting for her reaction. Her small body trembled. Then she took a step back. Aiden noticed immediately. His voice softened. "Ava, do you know this man?" She bit her lip, her eyes flickering between the stranger and Aiden. Then, in a voice so quiet it was barely a breath, she whispered, "That's not him." Aiden froze. "Are you sure?" Ava nodded firmly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It's not him. The man who helped me escape. It wasn't him." A heavy silence fell over the team. Aiden slowly turned back to the stranger. The man was still trembling, his face pale as a ghost. If it wasn't him, then who was the one who helped Ava? And more importantly, if he wasn't them, then they were still out there. Finn's brows furrowed, his ears standing high. Then suddenly, a sound echoed from deep within the forest, a whisper, so faint, yet cold enough to send ice through Aiden's veins. The whisper drifted through the trees, barely audible, but enough to make the air feel colder. Aiden's body tensed, his grip on his gun tightening, his eyes sweeping the dense darkness between the trunks. Someone was out there. Finn let out a low growl, but he didn't bark. He simply stood still, his muscles coiled like a spring, his ears pricked high. Ava shivered, pressing herself against Aiden, her wide eyes filled with fear. "We need to get him back to the station, but I have a feeling this isn't over." Aiden turned to the handcuffed stranger, who was still shaking, but there was something in his eyes. Not just fear, desperation. Aiden's voice dropped, firm but quiet. "If you don't tell us the truth, they'll find you before we can help you." The man took a sharp breath, his body trembling harder. Then, in a whisper so soft it barely carried through the night, he said, "You don't understand. They always know. They're always watching. Who is the stranger?" At the police station, Aiden sat across from the man in the interrogation room. Finn was beside him, his eyes locked onto Ethan, unwavering. His file name, Ethan Cole, former resident of Everwood, disappeared from all records 7 years ago. No travel documents, no identity changes, as if he had ceased to exist. But the strangest part, he had once been a witness in a missing persons case in Blackwood. And then he disappeared too. Aiden slowly opened the file, sliding it in front of Ethan, his voice low and steady. "You reported a disappearance, didn't you? A case that was never solved?" Ethan's eyes squeezed shut, his hands clenching into fists. Just hearing those words seemed enough to send sweat rolling down his temple. I shouldn't have called the police that day. I shouldn't have said anything." Aiden's eyes hardened. "Why?" Ethan's breath shuddered. "Because right after that, they came for me." Aiden's jaw tightened, them, again. His voice dropped. "Who are they?" Ethan shook his head violently, his throat tightening, as if even saying their name might seal his fate. "They're not like us, not human. A secretive group once lived near Blackwood Forest." Aiden's gut twisted. Something about this case felt deeply wrong. Without wasting time, he headed straight for the records room, searching through old files on Blackwood Forest. Finn stayed close to his side, sniffing around, as if he recognized a familiar scent. What he found. 20 years ago, a reclusive group had been living near Blackwood Forest. They weren't part of any official organization, but reports existed about their strange activities. Locals had gone missing, yet no official investigations were ever conducted. Aiden dug deeper. The police had tried to investigate, but the case was shut down for no clear reason. A disturbing connection. The disappearances began when this group appeared. But what was even more mysterious, when the group vanished, the disappearances stopped. So why were people going missing again now? Aiden glanced down at Finn. The shepherd was scratching at another stack of files, his nose buried in the paper, trying to point something out. Aiden flipped quickly through the folder, then froze. An old photograph, with a familiar face. Richard Hayes. He had been there. Finn uncovers a new lead. The underground shelter. Aiden's instincts were right. Everything led back to Blackwood. He assembled a small team, this time bringing along ground-penetrating equipment to search the old cabin site. Finn led them straight to the hidden shelter. But this time, Aiden noticed something strange. A section of the ground looked recently disturbed. Someone had moved something, or hidden something. Finn uncovers the hidden entrance. Without hesitation, Finn began digging, his paws scraping forcefully against the soft soil. Within minutes, something metallic clanked beneath his claws. A small iron door, buried just beneath the surface. Aiden's heartbeat pounded in his chest. A hidden underground passage. They had missed this before, but who had buried it? And more importantly, was someone still inside? Shocking discovery, the missing persons map. Aiden unlatched the metal door, slowly pulling it open. A wave of stale, cold air rushed out, revealing a dark staircase leading downward. No one spoke. Only the sound of tense breathing and Finn's low, uneasy growl filled the silence. Aiden flicked on his flashlight, illuminating a small underground chamber. What they found inside. A wooden table covered in dust but scattered with fresh notes. A journal, the handwriting erratic, frantic. A map of Blackwood Forest. But the most shocking discovery, red X's marked multiple locations across the forest. What did these X's mean? Aiden compared the red X's on the map to the list of missing persons cases, and then he saw it. Each X matched the exact locations where people had disappeared over the past 20 years. Aiden felt a cold chill creep down his spine. Someone had been tracking these disappearances. But why? What were they looking for? Finn scratched at the ground, then suddenly stopped, his nose buried in the corner of the room. Aiden followed his gaze. There, lying in the dust, an old police badge. The name engraved on it, Richard Hayes. Aiden clenched the badge tightly, his jaw tensing. Hayes had been here. But why? Finn let out a soft whine, but his body remained rigid, his eyes locked on the dark corner of the bunker. He smelled something. Something hidden. Something dangerous. Aiden's eyes flicked back to the map. The X's all lined up with the missing persons cases, but one stood out from the rest. It was larger, bolder, deep in the heart of Blackwood Forest. If there was anywhere they were hiding, it was there. Aiden clicked on his radio, his voice steady and firm. "I've got a location. We move now." Finn sprang up, his body shaking with readiness, his tail rigid, locked in focus, like he knew this was the final battle. Aiden glanced down at him, giving him a firm pat on the head. "Let's go, buddy. This time, we end it." As the police team moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. Finn sniffed the ground constantly, leading the way through narrow trails where footprints were deeply embedded in the damp earth. This place was still in use. Aiden marked the location on his GPS, then signaled for the team to move in carefully. Through the dense canopy, they finally saw it, an old structure, partially buried beneath the earth. A secret facility. Aiden motioned for the team to surround the area, their weapons raised, moving in silent formation. Finn tensed, letting out a low growl, signaling that someone was inside. Inside this facility, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. Aiden reached for the door handle, but it was locked from the inside. He gave a signal. One of the officers moved forward, placing a breach device on the lock. Within seconds, the door clicked open. The moment the door swung wide, Aiden realized they had been detected. An alarm blared through the facility. Aiden rushed in first, Finn right at his heels, with the police team close behind. Inside was a large, dimly lit room, covered with bulletin boards, maps, and documents pinned to the walls. They had been tracking every single disappearance. Aiden barely had time to register the name Richard Hayes on the board before gunfire erupted. "Take cover." He dove behind a table, the officers immediately returning fire. Finn leapt to the side, growling, his sharp eyes scanning for threats. The figures in the shadows didn't want the truth to be exposed. They hid in the dark corners, weapons raised, but Aiden noticed something in their eyes. Fear. These weren't mercenaries or assassins. They were people trapped in the same nightmare. Aiden took a calculated shot, aiming for the leg of one of them. The man collapsed, his gun clattering to the floor. In an instant, Finn lunged, pinning him to the ground, his growls a clear warning. They had captured one of them. But where were the others? Aiden's eyes swept the room, searching for Richard Hayes. For a moment, things seemed under control. Then Finn whipped around, barking loudly, and charged toward Aiden. A shadow lunged from the darkness, a long knife gleaming in hand. Aiden barely registered the attack before Finn leapt forward, slamming into him. The force knocked Aiden sideways, just as the blade sliced through the air where he had been standing, missing his shoulder by mere inches. If it hadn't been for Finn, Aiden might not have survived. Without hesitation, he fired a single shot into the attacker's leg. The man cried out in pain, collapsing to the floor. Finn pounced immediately, pinning him down. Aiden let out a shaky breath, his eyes locked on Finn. He had saved his life. Again. After the gunfight, the remaining attackers had been subdued and restrained. Aiden approached one of them, noting the man's pale, terrified expression. "Where is Richard Hayes?" The captive pressed his lips together, shaking his head, but his eyes flickered toward a reinforced metal door at the far end of the room. Was he locked inside? Finn followed Aiden's gaze, stepping forward, his stance rigid and alert. Aiden took a deep breath, raising his radio. "We're not done yet. Get that door open." Behind that door lay the answers to everything. As the heavy metal door creaked open, thick darkness spilled out from within. Aiden switched on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows, revealing a far larger space than expected. This wasn't just a holding cell, it was a covert operations hub. And inside, Richard Hayes sat tied to an old chair, but he was alive. Finn was the first to rush in, barking sharply, his eyes locked on Hayes. Aiden moved quickly, untying the restraints, but before he could finish, Hayes grabbed his wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "There's no time," Hayes gasped. "You don't understand. They're still out there." Aiden scanned the room, his eyes landing on a row of old monitors, all connected to hidden cameras placed throughout Blackwood Forest. He flipped through stacks of documents on the cluttered desk. They had been watching this area for years. Among the files, a horrifying truth came to light. The disappearances weren't random. Children were being selected based on specific traits, intelligence, survival instincts, or something else. Those who didn't meet the criteria were eliminated. Aiden's fists clenched tightly. What did they do to the children? Hayes shuddered, his breathing uneven. He looked Aiden straight in the eye. They're searching for something. Something that was buried a long time ago. It wasn't just about kidnapping children. They were looking for something. Finn suddenly darted out of the room, racing toward a section of the brick wall. He clawed at the ground, his paws scraping forcefully. There was another passage. Aiden signaled his team. With heavy tools, they broke through the sealed entrance, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. An abandoned shelter, long buried and forgotten. Inside, they found yellow documents, old photographs from decades ago. This mysterious facility wasn't new. It had existed for a long time under a different name. Everwood Research Facility. A research center? But researching what? Aiden forced open a locked filing cabinet, rifling through the contents. Among the files, he found something critical. A child's file, marked with one chilling word: survivor. The document was over 20 years old, but the name on it, Ava Kate. Aiden froze. No, that's impossible. Hayes stared at the file, his face pale with shock. They weren't just kidnapping children, they were searching for survivors. Ava wasn't the only child who had ever been monitored. There had been others before her, and now they were hunting for one of them. But why? And more importantly, if Ava was a survivor, then what happened to the children before her? Before anyone could process the revelation, Finn barked sharply, his body tense. He lunged toward the entrance of the bunker. Someone was watching them. Aiden whipped around, gun raised. But there was nothing, only empty darkness. Hayes shook his head, his voice low and grim. You don't understand. They're always watching. They never left. The ones responsible had been captured, but was that all of them? As Aiden stepped out of the bunker, the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows over Blackwood Forest. It had returned to its deceptive silence, but now Aiden knew that silence was only a disguise. Finn lifted his gaze, his keen eyes scanning the darkness, sensing something far beyond human perception. The case seemed over, but Aiden knew the worst might still be coming. Was it truly over? Or was a far more horrifying truth still waiting to be uncovered? The forest remained shrouded in darkness as Aiden stood motionless outside the hidden bunker. The masterminds had been captured. But the story wasn't over. There was still one missing piece. Why were they choosing children? And who was Ava in all of this? Finn's ears stood tall, his instincts still picking up an unseen danger lingering nearby. Aiden turned back to Richard Hayes, the man who had disappeared for 10 years. You need to tell me the truth. What are we really up against? Hayes took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a heavy whisper. They're not just a criminal organization. They're a secret society that has existed for over 50 years. 50 years? Aiden frowned. The documents in the bunker had revealed the truth. The Everwood Society, a group that had been active in this area since the 1970s. They weren't a cult. They were a covert research operation, funded by an unknown entity. Their objective, to find special children who possessed a certain trait. But what was that trait? Aiden clenched his fists. What were they looking for? Hayes lifted his head, his eyes filled with deep fear. They believe some children are different, that certain children are chosen. The truth behind the missing children was buried in the confidential files inside the bunker. Aiden scanned through the list of abducted children. Not all of them had disappeared forever. Some had been selected and then vanished without a trace. The documents described them as possessing a unique ability called sensitivity. Those who didn't meet the criteria were eliminated. But what about Ava? Aiden snapped his head toward Hayes, his voice sharp. What makes Ava special? Hayes remained silent for a long moment, then let out a weary sigh. Have you ever wondered why Ava remembers everything that happened in the forest, but can't recall exactly who helped her escape? Her memories had been altered. They hadn't just been kidnapping children, they had been conducting psychological experiments. They wanted to see how a child's mind could be manipulated, how memories could be controlled, shaped, or erased entirely. Aiden felt a chill crawl down his spine. They were trying to turn these children into something else. The dark experiments had been carefully documented in the files. Children were taken into the forest, abandoned to see how they would react. They were tested on survival instincts, psychological resilience, and something else. something the group believed to be a heightened sensitivity to the world around them. Those who failed the tests were simply discarded. But the most disturbing part, they never fully understood what they were looking for. Then came the breakthrough. Ava was one of the last children subjected to this experiment. But what made her different was that she escaped. Richard Hayes had found Ava before they could fully take control of her mind. Aiden felt his pulse pounding. Ava wasn't just a victim. She might be the first child to ever escape their system. She can remember everything. If Ava could recover her full memory, she would be the only witness capable of exposing everything. But was it truly over? Finn suddenly lifted his head, ears standing tall. Aiden immediately sensed it too. Blackwood Forest wasn't completely silent. Finn let out a low whine, his eyes locked onto the shadows between the trees. The masterminds had been captured, but someone was still out there. Hayes spoke softly, his voice trembling. "Do you really think this is over?" Aiden's hand tightened around his holstered gun. He knew. Even though the truth had come to light, the darkness in Blackwood Forest had not disappeared. Blackwood Forest had returned to its familiar silence. But was this quiet truly the end? Aiden had exposed the truth, rescued Ava, and dismantled the organization behind the mysterious disappearances. But between the faded documents and the fragmented testimonies, there were still unanswered questions. Had they truly captured everyone involved? Or was someone else still out there, continuing the experiments in the shadows? What really made these children targets? And was Ava truly the only one carrying this secret? Finn had fought fearlessly, protecting both Aiden and Ava until the very end. He was more than just a K-9 officer. He was a loyal friend, a true hero. This story wasn't just an investigation. It was a reminder that sometimes darkness can hide in plain sight, and the truth isn't always easily uncovered. What do you think about this story? Has this mysterious organization truly been eliminated? Or is someone still out there, continuing their twisted work? Do you believe there are things about Blackwood Forest that remain unexplained? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to Dog Stories so you won't miss more incredible stories like this one. Finn did something extraordinary, and dogs like him are always there, protecting humans in ways we can't even imagine. If you love stories of loyalty and bravery, make sure to subscribe to Dog Stories today. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thank you for watching until the very end. See you in the next story on Dog Stories.